Hey guys, welcome back. So in response to the last couple of episodes where we examined how Marxism has shaped leftist culture and politics, I kept getting two main reactions. First, well, who cares? What's the harm in a little communism? Because apparently if the leading institutions and influencers of the left openly embrace an ideology responsible for over 100 million deaths, that's like an aesthetic choice. Like wearing a Che Guevara t-shirt. No big deal. And second, okay, fine, this may be true, but we're fighting a literal Nazi here. The argument being that talking about Marxist influence is a distraction from the real issue, stopping the oh-so-evil Trump and his Nazi minion Elon Musk. But then I took a step back and looked at the numbers, and something wasn't adding up. If Trump is truly Hitler 2.0, why did he receive historic support from Native American, Black, and Asian voters? Did millions of people of color, working class people, billionaires, women, and yes, even some gay people change their mind overnight and suddenly throw their hat in with a known fascist? Or were they making rational decisions based on how the Democrats have actually governed? Now, I admit I used to let the headlines just wash over me. If you say he's a felon, then sure, he's a felon. If you say he's a rabid racist, then yeah, I'm sure you're right. But now that the dust has settled on the endless scandals and breathless breaking news that built the origin story of America's greatest adversary, and before the next so-called constitutional crisis takes over the news cycle, I decided this is a great opportunity for us to dive a little deeper and figure out what the hell just happened over the last 10 years and what came of those headlines. Because that's honestly what I've been basing my understanding of Trump on. So is Trump a criminal mastermind or not? Should we ignore the massive corruption in leftist history and the scandals uncovered by his administration, scandals involving trillions of dollars, because ultimately he is without question literally Hitler? Or was this all a massive smokescreen? And on the flip side, what did the Democrats actually do to dig their own grave? So let's check it out. I just wanted to quickly introduce you to my viewing room. This is where I'm going to be watching the clips with you. Just be warned, there are a lot of clips because, of course, deep diving into each of these issues takes days and hours of explanation. So I just wanted the clips to speak for themselves and be the receipts for what we're talking about. Because at the end of the day, who am I? I'm just a regular person like you who was watching all of this stuff unfold. But because it stretched across a 10-year period, we often didn't have the full context or really understand what we were looking at. And this is our opportunity to do that, to really see what was the full story and how did things end up shaking out. So let's see what we got here. For years, the biggest story in politics was that Donald Trump colluded with Russia to steal the 2016 election. The media went on about it non-stop, starting in the middle of the presidential campaign in 2016 and on through to 2024. But when the dust finally settled, what did we learn?
John Durham, a Trump-era special counsel assigned to infamously investigate the investigation into former President Donald Trump's alleged ties to Russia, released a bombshell 305-page report, and after roughly 4 years, it found that, in fact, there was no collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. And the FBI should never have launched a probe into the matter to begin with. Even CNN admits the report is a devastating blow to the agency and exonerates Donald Trump. Here's Jake Tapper. Let's watch.
Regardless, the report is now here. It has dropped, and it might not have produced everything of what some Republicans hoped for. It is, regardless, devastating to the FBI. And to a degree, it does exonerate Donald Trump.
Here are some major takeaways from the report. So Durham finds that, one, the FBI didn't have sufficient information to open the case investigating Trump's alleged ties to Russia. The Bureau relied on raw, unanalyzed, uncorroborated intelligence. Durham also criticizes the FBI's inability to corroborate any of the infamous Steele dossier, which contained a series of salacious allegations about Trump and his possible ties to Russia. The FBI operated with bias and different standards between Trump and 2016 Democratic presidential nominee Hillary Clinton. And finally, even though the report offers a scathing rebuke of the FBI's conduct regarding the Trump-Russia probe, it does not recommend any new charges against individuals.
Journalist Aaron Mate tweeted, Durham report underscores that Trump-Russia collusion was a Clinton campaign scam abetted by FBI deception and media stenography. And Matt Taibbi writes, ex-CIA head John Brennan re-Mueller report They found no conspiracy. Brennan on MSNBC, I suspected there was more than there actually was. Years of Trump-Russia hysteria based on suspicion only. It was Mickey Mouse intelligence. A dream is a wish your heart makes.
And who funded this whole charade? Hillary Clinton's campaign and the Democratic National Committee, or DNC. Now, I know it's tempting to brush this off as a right-wing conspiracy, but even the Washington Post, the New York Times, and CNN eventually admitted it. The DNC and Clinton campaigns secretly paid for opposition research, then funneled it through law firms to hide what they were doing. And when the fabricated nonsense got fed to the FBI and laundered through the media, it was suddenly treated like a national security crisis. Now, let's get one thing straight. Fabricating evidence to frame a political opponent is not just unethical, it's illegal. Under the Federal Election Campaign Act, it's explicitly prohibited to fraudulently misrepresent oneself or one's actions in a way that harms another candidate's campaign. Meaning, if you pay to manufacture a scandal that triggers years of government investigations and impeachment attempts, you're violating federal law. But what was the punishment for this massive deception? In March 2022, the Federal Election Commission fined the DNC a measly $105,000 and Clinton's campaign a laughable $8,000 for misreporting their payments to the law firm that funded the dossier. That's it. For reference, that's chump change to a party that has access to $1 to $2 billion at any given time. And after this monumental fraud was exposed, did the media hold itself accountable? Did the left-wing establishment take a hard look at how they spent years pushing a conspiracy theory that undermined a democratically elected sitting president? Nope. They just quietly shoved the story under the rug and moved on to the next manufactured scandal. It seems that when the left cheats, manipulates, and outright lies, we just call it saving democracy. It's not just hypocrisy, it's corruption at a level that should make every person furious.
It's a story with suggestions of a scandal, one that could threaten a presidency. At its center is a laptop. The computer belongs to Hunter Biden, son of Joe, the US president. What did the computer repairman find?
A lot of porn. When you first open it up, it's just full-on homemade porn by Hunter. Lots of pictures of his penis adorned with M&Ms or
crack, smoking crack.
Or
a lot of these photographs
crack.
we've seen now, they're all over the internet.
You know, being massaged with the dainty feet of a hooker or flopped into a pizza. So there's a lot of, and him having sex, he's done a lot of film.
And now we all know that the Hunter Biden laptop story was more than just about the hookers, the drugs, the tax evasion, or the gun charges. The real story is what was buried alongside
The laptop's contents, and then told the FBI in December 2019.
And when the FBI had done nothing about it since December 2019, he got increasingly concerned because he knew there was exculpatory information on the laptop for Donald Trump that Donald Trump should have been able to use in his defense in his impeachment, but never did. never was able to, because effectively Donald Trump got impeached for Joe Biden's sins. It was Joe Biden who threatened Ukraine with withholding $1 billion of USAID unless they fired the prosecutor who was investigating Burisma and Hunter Biden's, bosses. And it was Donald Trump who ended up getting impeached for supposedly threatening to withhold aid unless President Zelensky actually investigated the Bidens.
Yeah, so that was Trump's first impeachment. Just on that, this was led by Pelosi, I think.
Yeah.
What exactly did they think that Trump had done anything wrong there?
They just saw. I guess they were listening in on the phone. It was a public phone call. I mean, there were a lot of people listening in on Trump's phone call with Zelensky. The Democrats knew that this was dangerous because the mess in Ukraine caused by Hunter Biden being on the grift was immense. That Burisma being corrupt and the prosecutor who was investigating Burisma in Ukraine being fired when he was in the middle of the pointy end of the investigation, which would have included, he says, subpoenaing Hunter Biden to come and be a witness. And that was a scandal at the time, which Joe Biden managed to ride out because I write about this in The Big Guy. There was a concerted operation by the blob that protects Joe Biden. You were talking about the CIA, the FBI, the State Department, the Department of Justice, the IRS. They all swung into action to create a false media narrative about the firing of the Ukrainian prosecutor. And the narrative was that this was a European project, that the Europeans wanted Viktor Shokin, the Ukrainian prosecutor, to be fired because he was corrupt. And that, in fact, his sin was he was not investigating Burisma, which is the most corrupt company in the most corrupt country in Europe.
Catherine Herridge, thank you so much for joining us. Your latest story up on CatherineHerridgeReports.com reveals that federal law enforcement agencies knew the Hunter Biden laptop story was real, and yet they pumped the brakes on an investigation. Tell us a little bit about this massive, massive scoop.
Well, one of the things that struck me with the IRS whistleblowers is that you dial it back 4 years ago and everyone was labeling the Hunter Biden laptop as a Russian plant. But what the whistleblowers told us is that in late 2019, everyone on that investigative team, so the IRS, the FBI, Justice Department prosecutors, they all knew that Hunter Biden's laptop was real. And really from that point forward, the IRS, Justice Department, they were tapping the brakes on this investigation. And they were blocked from taking very standard overt investigative steps like issuing subpoenas. And they were completely blocked from investigating anything that might have led to Joe Biden, but they said you could not ask about the big guy.
People are going to hear this and think this is a conspiracy. Like, we're told a lot of conspiracies aren't true. This really sounds like one.
Joe Biden's final act as president revealed to the world he is corrupt. In the final minutes of his presidency, the 82-year-old issued get-out-of-jail-free cards to his entire family. After pardoning his son, Hunter Biden, Joe Biden flexed his presidential power in a move that is unprecedented in recent history by granting preemptive blanket pardons for his family for any non-violent crimes that they may have committed. This includes his brother James, his sister-in-law Sarah Jones, his sister Valerie, his brother-in-law John Owens, and his youngest brother Francis Biden. This is something that Joe Biden claimed he would never do. Joe Biden wants you to believe that all members of his family are innocent, that none of them have broken the law, they're just victims of political attacks. Well, put simply, if there was nothing to hide, why did his family members accept the pardons? They could have refused them. And why did Joe Biden need to make sure that the pardons he issued date back to January 1, 2014? What happened in 2014? Well, it's the year that Hunter Biden joined the board of Burisma, the Ukrainian energy company, despite lacking any experience in the energy sector. At the time that Joe Biden was vice president and in charge of relations with Ukraine. Hunter Biden and Joe Biden were allegedly raking in millions of dollars through different bank accounts. And Hunter Biden's former business partner, Devon Archer, told Congress Hunter Biden was selling the illusion of access to his father. The whole Biden family have been accused of influence peddling.
Whoa, that was intense. I think I was watching this story play out in the background, but I didn't realize how twisted it was because we were actively being misled, because the story was being actively suppressed. What do you know? During the height of election season. So the corruption involving this laptop and the lengths that the Democrat Party went to cover this up, to suppress it in the media, is a big part of the rest of this story. So keep all this in mind as we move forward. And here's where we circle back to the absolute magnitude of the suppression of free speech and the media manipulation surrounding the Hunter Biden laptop story. The release of the Twitter files in 2022 and statements from tech leaders like Mark Zuckerberg were the first cracks that completely blew open the story about Democrats tampering with the media.
My questions are for Mr. Taibbi and Mr. Schellenberger. What was the most alarming thing that you came across during your review of internal Twitter documents?
I think the most alarming thing that we saw was the regular organized stream of communication between the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, and the largest tech companies in the country. They had an organized system for flagging content, not occasionally, but in enormous numbers, involving spreadsheets of accounts that ran to the hundreds and thousands. And this was shocking to us, and to the Congressman's point, this isn't crazy conspiracy theory. We've already had 4 federal judges rule that they believe this activity violates the First Amendment. This is quite serious. We didn't know whether it was against the law, but we certainly thought it was shocking enough to be in the public interest, and that for me was the most serious thing.
For me, it was seeing the so-called former FBI officials within Twitter and working with and other groups, including this Aspen Institute, participating in an effort to so-called pre-bunk the Hunter Biden laptop before it was ever published in the New York Post, and then to get it censored by Twitter in violation of Twitter's own terms of service, whose internal staff had concluded that the New York Post tweet had not violated their terms of service, and they censored it anyway.
Mr. Schellenberg, I want to ask you further that revolving door between the FBI and Twitter, and I also want to ask about those third-party, essentially government proxies. You referenced the Aspen Institute. Can you delve deeper into both of those questions, both of those topics?
Sure. It was the former general counsel of the FBI, Jim Baker, and the former deputy director of the FBI had both taken jobs at Twitter. There were so many FBI people at Twitter that they had their own internal group and their own little crib sheet to describe the difference between the terms that they use at the FBI versus at Twitter.
CIA had it as well.
Yeah, CIA as well had their own little internal group. We discovered that Aspen Institute had created a workshop that it was attended by basically all of the major media, including as well as all the major social media platforms, to basically pre-bunk in advance the Hunter Biden laptop, even though it had not been, there was no evidence that it existed outside of the fact that the FBI knew that they had it because they got it in December 2019. So to have the Aspen Institute trying to persuade people not to cover the Hunter Biden laptop story in August and September of 2020 was quite chilling and disturbing to see.
These content moderators at social media platforms like Twitter wield an enormous amount of power in terms of determining not only what Americans can say, but also what Americans can see. Do you believe, Mr. Taibbi and Mr. Schellenberg, that it's appropriate for unelected bureaucrats or these tech companies to collude to influence what Americans can say or read?
Absolutely not. And, I wanted to stress again that all this was happening secretively with the blessing of the Department of Homeland Security, with them sending things to, this is from the EIP at Stanford to Twitter and Facebook saying, we repeat our recommendations that this account be suspended. We recommend labeling all instances of this article. We recommend that you flag as false this. All these demands being made secretly without any public review. My view is that the government doesn't decide who can speak in the town square. Why should the government be deciding who can speak on social media platforms? We, the people, should decide our own content as adults, legal content. It should not be decided by either government or big tech.
And Mr. Taibbi and Mr. Schellenberg, do you believe that this censorship is a form of election interference?
Absolutely it is. There's no question in my mind.
This was a really critical point in the timeline in discovering the depth of corruption within the Democrat Party. So essentially, they exposed direct collusion between the government and big tech to censor the true story involving criminal activity with the Biden family. And obviously, this was all in the name of manipulating the public in order to control election narratives and outcomes. It turns out Twitter actively suppressed the New York Post reporting about the laptop. Intelligence officials, 51 of them to be concise, coordinated the bogus Russian disinformation lie, and Facebook admitted they throttled the Hunter Biden laptop story at the government's request. And if that isn't dystopian enough for you, just recently, under Musk's leadership, DOGE uncovered that USAID spent millions of taxpayer dollars funding both small and large media outlets to push Democrat talking points and, you guessed it, suppress the Hunter Biden laptop story. I mean, guys, this is insane. We always suspected it, but Elon Musk brought it to us in high definition. There is now no doubt that the US government, and specifically the Democrat Party, was controlling the media, engineering narratives, and misleading the public on a massive scale. And all I can see are my friends calling him a Nazi. You mean the guy that went to the concentration camp last year with well-known Jewish commentator Ben Shapiro? And you're talking about that guy who's like unapologetically pro-Israel and visited Israel after October 7th's terrorist attack? They're calling him a Nazi. I'm confused about that one. So let me level set with you for 1 second. Do you think that the media is maybe smearing Elon because he single-handedly exposed their corruption? And now you hate the man who pulled back the curtain because you're falling for the smear campaign? I don't know. I'm not an expert in these things, but I think it's really worth reevaluating and reconsidering this whole Musk is a Nazi thing. And I mean, really, same for Trump. He's done nothing that would indicate Nazism. Doesn't he have Jewish grandchildren and a Jewish son-in-law whom he empowered with high positions in his administration? His daughter, whom he's very close to, converted to Judaism. I mean, like, this just doesn't track, guys. This doesn't make sense, like, at all. And, like, what do we think we're doing by promoting people who are not Nazis as Nazis? Do you think that that's not totally insulting to the memory of people who died at the hands of Nazis? Do you think that that's not totally insulting to actually Jewish people? Like, it's just gross. It's weird.
Stop it. Get some help.
I know this one's gonna sting because we really wanted this one to be true. Like, as all the other cases were crumbling into dust, this was our last shining beacon to say, no, this was really, really bad. It was like the one thing we could confidently hang our hats on. I don't know if you've noticed this, guys, but if the media really, really wants you to believe something, that's probably when we should start bracing ourselves for the inevitable bamboozling. But I don't know, that could just be me. Am I the only one noticing this pattern? Either way, let's just dive in. January 6th, the insurrection, one of the worst days in American history. A day that will live in infamy.
January 6th was an atrocity. It was one of the worst moments in American history. And when you think about the worst moments in American history, you know, like World War II, things that happened, you know, like the Holocaust, chattel slavery, we need to never forget.
Seriously, we really bought this. Like, how thirsty do you have to be, Sonny Houston?
A few moments later.
Is the Democratic narrative surrounding January 6th crumbling? Well, in case you missed it, last week, House Republicans, led by Speaker Mike Johnson, made over 40,000 hours of previously secret January 6th footage available online for public access.
According to former President Donald Trump, that video is exonerating. He reposted a warning to those who blame him for the January 6th riot. It read, quote, "Everything you've been told about January 6th is BS. The real insurrectionists are those who framed Trump to try to stop him from ever being president again, and who framed you as domestic terrorists to try to crush America first. They have failed, and they will pay."
I'm not one who's trying to totally recast the events of January 6th. I think a lot of bad behavior did go on, which was rightly prosecuted, including trespassing and breaking of windows and defacing of public property, and people who fought with the police. I have no tolerance for that. I do think, now we've seen, though, a lot of footage, so this new footage shows people calmly walking through the halls. The police are letting them do so. This might be after the protesters had already smashed through, and then other people came through. But they did, they charged some people who weren't even there, the Proud Boys leadership, with organizing a terrorist attack on par with like 9/11. They got like 20 years. And so when you see footage of a lot of protesters, not all of them, not saying it's all of them, calmly walking through the halls, escorted by the police or around the police in a way that is not, they're not getting any pushback, they're not being told not to do that. I think it does very much complicate their narrative that we watched a highly organized extremist attack on our Capitol with an actual goal of halting the election, and that it was part of this extremist movement, that it had leadership and it was organized, and there's no more to question or see there.
The media worked overtime to try and make us fear January 6th more than the year-long riots that actually burned down our cities. But as with every other topic today, the truth is finally trickling out. So let's knock out some of the biggest, most obvious lies right off the bat. To start, the Cassidy Hutchinson testimony was a lie. She claimed Trump tried to grab the wheel of the presidential limo and lunged at his head of security after being told he couldn't go to the Capitol. Reality, the driver himself testified this never happened.
Let's just remember some of the things that have been said about this issue. Hear from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in October of 2021. She said, quote, "Any member of Congress who helped plot a terrorist attack on our nation's capital must be expelled. This was a terror attack, 138 injured, almost 10 dead. Those responsible remain a danger to our democracy, our country, and our human life in the vicinity of our capital and beyond." I love that sentence. Those responsible remain a danger to our democracy, our country, and human life in the vicinity of our capital and beyond. Now, everybody was very confused. Like, what do you mean almost 10 people died on January 6th? First of all, why would you use that formulation? Why not say the number of people who died? Why would you say almost 10? What does that mean? Like 6, 8, 9, 7? What does that mean? But as I said, there were only 4 people who died on January 6th. She's apparently counting some of the protesters who died. She says 5 protesters died on January 6th. It would, of course, be embarrassing if you tried to call it a coup or an insurrection and the only people who died on January 6th, which was true, were the people who were actually there protesting for Donald Trump. 1 of whom was shot, 2 of whom died of a heart attack, and 1 of whom died of a drug overdose. These were not people who were part of a well-trained militia, to put that mildly. But there was a need to exaggerate it intensely from the beginning, and so it couldn't just be that 4 Trump supporters died. You had to have other people dying as well, and so they just lied about it constantly. Here, just to give you a reminder of how these lies proliferated from the very beginning about January 6th, all with the intention, while these emotions were still raw, to make it seem as though there was some kind of mass murder spree on the part of Trump supporters at the Capitol. Listen to what the people who insist they're the only ones who combat disinformation ended up saying.
Brian Sicknick died after being hit in the head with a fire extinguisher during the fight.
He died at the age of 42 after he was bludgeoned with a fire extinguisher.
All with such a melodramatic tone. He was beaten. Just think about this. They went on television and they said that Brian Sicknick was murdered by Capitol Hill protesters because he was beaten to death. His head was bludgeoned by a fire extinguisher by protesters. A complete and utter fabrication. And you just see one network after the next, as usual, saying it in unison. Here from NBC News, 3.5 months later, reported the truth because they had to, because the medical examiner pronounced it. Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick died of natural causes after the riot. A medical examiner says an autopsy revealed that Sicknick, who died hours after the Capitol riot, suffered 2 strokes at the base of the brain stem caused by a blood clot. And then here from Newsweek in August, quote, 4 Capitol Hill police officers have died by suicide since the January 6th insurrection, and they decided they're going to count 4 suicides by police officers for who knows what reason. I mean, is it really reasonable if a police officer kills themselves to blame their participation in a 3-hour riot? If that's not something they can withstand, what are they doing as police officers? The strategy of the Democratic Party and its allies in media and the establishment wing of the Republican Party that was devoted to Donald Trump's defeat was very clear. It was to say, don't care about policy or ideology or any of the dissatisfactions that you have in your life. There's something bigger at stake. It's January 6th and our democracy and this person who wants to dismantle it.
And there are a million little lies like this that you'll discover once you start researching this issue in depth. But I think the most important and most obvious is the entire premise that Trump incited the riot and therefore led an insurrection. We all saw him tell people to be peaceful. We all saw his tweet telling them to leave. There was no secret battle plan, no covert ops team hired, at least not by him anyway. No evidence he orchestrated an overthrow of the government. Then came the legal test. And so flimsy that even the Supreme Court had to step in, ruling that presidents have immunity for official acts. But that didn't stop the media from screaming that Trump tried to overthrow democracy for years. Oh, and if he really led an insurrection, wouldn't they have, charged him with insurrection? Instead, they threw together a vague, quote, election interference case. I suspect because even they knew the whole thing wouldn't hold up. Recent disclosures have also shed light on Trump's actions leading up to January 6th. Transcripts released by a House Oversight Subcommittee indicate that days before the event, President Trump met senior Pentagon leaders, urging them to ensure security and suggesting the deployment of National Guard troops to maintain peace. However, these directives were reportedly not implemented by Pentagon leadership, further lampooning the idea that the riot was his intention.
The report reveals that there were a total of 26 confidential human sources in the crowd that day.
So a confidential human source is a fancy phrase for a spy. So we know there were 26 paid spies by the FBI present on the Capitol grounds that day, according to this IG's report. Apparently only 3 of them were authorized to be there. So my question, John, is what were the other 23 doing? Now, they weren't, apparently, according to this report, encouraged or directed to be there, but were they told they couldn't be there? Like, what exactly were they doing? And in fact, some of them, as we learned from this report, entered the restricted area, went into the Capitol. Were they inciting anything? Were they enticing anyone to go with them? If, in fact, there were conversations occurring like, hey, let's go in there, let's do that, let's do this. Entrapment is a defense.
Another concerning contradiction around narratives about January 6th is that when Trump wants to contest an election, it's treasonous. But when the Democrats do, it's rational, normal, and healthy for democracy. As we've already mentioned, Hillary spent years claiming that the 2016 election was stolen.
I believe he knows he's an illegitimate president.
You can run the best campaign. You can even become the nominee, and you can have the election stolen from you.
And even paid to have fabricated evidence made to prove it. And there was almost zero response from Democrat constituents.
Now, the wild allegation that Trump had colluded with Russia to all but steal the 2016 election was reported uncritically by the bulk of the media for years. Now that narrative is falling apart, that very dubious, politically motivated narrative. But one can argue that the damage is already done. The operation to discredit the Trump presidency and undermine the democratic process worked. And if you look at some of the polling, a disturbing number of left-leaning voters in America believe that Russian collusion determined the 2016 election result. Many of these Democrat voters to this day believe that Trump stole the election with the help of Russia. I'm now joined by international security professor Max Abrahams. Max, recent events have exposed Russiagate as a hoax, an operation, whatever you want to call it. Can you explain to my viewers what happened?
A foundational component of it very early on was what's known as the Steele dossier. And the Steele dossier was important because it was early allegations of Trump colluding with the Russians, helping him to beat Hillary Clinton in the 2016 presidential election. That information was then used explicitly by U.S. government agencies, including FBI, to authorize warrant, a wiretapping of Trump associates. Also, that information was leaked to the media, BuzzFeed in particular, and it just went viral. That basically set the narrative for years and years of allegations that would again surface in the Mueller report and in the impeachment trials. So Hillary Clinton advocates will say, oh no, you're making too big of a deal of the Steele dossier, but it really was very influential in terms of getting both the U.S. government as well as the U.S. media to buy into this narrative. And what we've discovered increasingly, including over the past week, is that the Steele dossier was totally nonsense. We knew previously that it was paid for by the Hillary Clinton campaign. What we didn't fully realize is that the contents of that dossier was based on just completely made up statements by Hillary Clinton's own associates. So she paid for it and then she filled it with rubbish contents.
Democrats question every election they lose. Never any outrage from the public. But when Trump does it, all hell breaks loose. Now, call me old-fashioned, but I personally believe that any concerns about election fraud should be investigated without intimidation. Yet somehow overnight, questioning election integrity became a thought crime. I watched in real time as everyone in my community suddenly started parroting this idea that even talking about election fraud was absurd. Why? Because the media and politicians implicated in the crime told them so? Be honest, if we were being rational and impartial, most people would call the DNC's media manipulation and suppression of the Biden family corruption right before an election exactly what it is: actual election interference. Especially when you consider the Technometrica Institute of Policy and Politics poll, which found that 79% of Americans believe Trump would have won re-election if voters had known the truth about the Hunter Biden laptop. 47% of respondents said that knowing the laptop was real would have changed their vote. So just to be clear, the media and intelligence community conspired to censor damaging information about one candidate, helped elect another, and now we're supposed to pretend that that wasn't election interference, but that the 3-hour riot was an insurrection and/or was election interference. Okay, got it. Instead of being real about any of this, we all ran with the Trump is an irrational lunatic storyline. And I'll admit it, I 100% participated in this. I more so fell for the Trump is a fascist narrative and even helped to organize a protest against him on Election Day in Philadelphia. Yeah, that big kind of crisis moment that was happening on the national news. I was there in that crowd of thousands of people screaming about fascism. It's extremely embarrassing to think back on. I even gave a righteous outrage quote to my local newspaper about January 6th. It's cringe. It's cringe to look back on. But here's the truth. I never actually thought January 6th was any worse than the BLM riots I personally witnessed and defended. I just saw my willingness to lend my voice to the outrage echo chamber as doing my part for my side. Harmless at worst, but helpful in the long run, right? This is exactly how the slippery slope happens. We compromise our principles just a little to justify small contradictions for the greater good. But before we know it, we've allowed ourselves to be pulled further and further away from the truth, until we're standing on a foundation built on lies and manipulation. So again, I ask you, why does the average American not know any of this? For those that do, how have you convinced yourself that this doesn't matter? Look, all I can say is I'm beyond excited to see what Pam Bondi and Kash Patel reveal when they finally get the green light to release the rest of the January 6 files. Something is telling me we haven't even scratched the surface of our understanding of what really happened yet.
A new report claims that FBI Director Kash Patel is about to blow the gates wide open on the January 6th Fedsurrection. Yes, the Fedsurrection. Multiple news outlets are reporting that Patel has been dogged in getting information to Congress about the event, specifically about the pipe bomber, which, you know, is the key to unraveling the entire plot to entrap Trump supporters on January 6th. This is going to be one of the biggest exposures of the deep state weaponizing government against us that we have ever seen. In fact, I can't think off the top of my head of a single event of the deep state being exposed that we've ever experienced that would be bigger than this.
Ms. Foley, can you describe for us what lawfare is?
Lawfare is the use of legal processes, either civil or criminal, to go after a political opponent.
And Mr. Epstein, Alvin Bragg's 34-count indictment against President Trump was the first time a former president had been indicted in history. Is that correct?
That's correct.
But the facts of that case had been known for years. Isn't that also true?
Yes, and litigated.
And why did federal prosecutors then choose not to charge President Trump?
Obviously, they didn't think that the evidence substantiated any crimes.
Do we yet know what the underlying crime was that Donald Trump allegedly committed that was the basis for the convictions?
Well, obviously, the underlying New York criminal statute was interpreted broadly, but the supposition is that the president, through this alleged hush money scheme, was engaging in election crimes, and even, of course, the case directly referred to federal election crimes.
But what do you mean supposition? Didn't they have to prove that that's what he had done?
And of course, there was no unanimous jury determination on that. And in fact, there was, of course, no proof. The argument was there must have been some conspiracy with the Trump organization and others.
So they didn't prove the underlying crime, they just convicted him of something in state law. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I would also note that that based off an executive action in New York, there was a stay of these types of indictments during COVID, and there was, of course, a very aggressive reinterpretation of a stay designed to protect criminal defendants in order to go after the president.
Have you ever seen anything like that New York case in your entire years of practice?
No, never.
Were you shocked at what happened in that court?
I was, as were many in the legal academy and many practitioners.
You know, I sit here and I listen to all of the caterwauling on the other side about Elon Musk. I don't know what he has to do with anything today. I listen to all of the accusations about Russia. Boy, I wish we could retire that word someday. That has nothing to do with what we're talking about. I listen to all of these, you know, this nonsense that is being spewed out there. And what I can't understand is why anyone wants to undermine our criminal or civil justice system in the manner that has been done over the last couple of years with lawfare, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. Does anybody really think that anybody was confused or that we couldn't figure this out or we didn't even know exactly what was happening with these cases in New York and the Fani Willis cases? We all knew what was happening, right? It was to stop him from running for president. Pretty simple to figure out, isn't it? Isn't that a classic example of lawfare?
I'm here today to announce the appointment of a special counsel in connection with two ongoing criminal investigations that have received significant public attention. The first, as described in court filings in the District of Columbia, is the investigation into whether any person or entity unlawfully interfered with the transfer of power following the 2020 presidential election or the certification of the Electoral College vote held on or about January 6, 2021. The second is the ongoing investigation involving classified documents and other presidential records, as well as the possible obstruction of that investigation, referenced and described in court filings in a pending matter in the Southern District of Florida. Based on recent developments, including the former president's announcement that he is a candidate for president in the next election, and the sitting president's stated intention to be a candidate as well, I have concluded that it is in the public interest to appoint a special counsel. Today, I signed an order appointing Jack Smith to serve as special counsel.
Tulsi, it is fantastic to see you tonight, as always. What do you make of Merrick Garland's deciding to come out a few days after the debate in a very hot political season?
You know, it's hard not to laugh at his statement where he tried to sound so serious and so convicted and so grave about never, ever politicizing or weaponizing these government agencies, when in fact, that is what they are doing currently and what they have been doing for years, even going all the way back to during President Trump's administration. I would tell Merrick Garland today, if you are serious about the words you have just delivered to the American people, why don't you start by investigating some of your own federal agencies, like the Department of Homeland Security and TSA, and ask them why, after one day, the very next day after I called out Kamala Harris for being a danger to our country, should she be elected as president, I got added to a secret domestic terrorist list. That's a good place to start. Why doesn't he start by going after people within his own FBI who, after FBI agent Steve Friend blew the whistle on how the FBI is essentially being used as the Democrats' police force, their personal partisan police force, he was attacked by the leadership of the FBI, doxing him, exposing his own private medical records, and so forth. And then obviously you talked about the examples with President Trump that are too many to cite, but that have been made very clear to the American people and those paying attention with any objectivity that this is lawfare. This is the kind of thing that happens in dictatorships and authoritarian governments, where those who are in power, Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, are weaponizing and politicizing the Department of Justice and law enforcement agencies, both at the federal level and the state level, to take out their political opponent, the greatest threat to their power, in a way that has never been done before in our country's history. That's where he should start.
Y'all, I'm scared for us. I keep seeing people talk about lawfare as if it's a conspiracy theory. Like Trump is using it to prop up a dictatorship or something like that. And not like this is the thing that was used against him by our federal and state institutions to politically prosecute him unjustly. Like I'm really confused if we are actually this lost, or are we all just like playing pretend? Because I didn't get the email that this was the new hoax that we were all running with. Because this is concerning. I'm really hoping that by running through all of these different cases that are considered lawfare, we can get a better understanding of what happened and kind of try to get on the same page. And let me just preface this with two things. I am not an expert, so if you want the legalese and all of the really deep dive reasons as to why these cases are extremely messed up and specifically relate to the question of lawfare, you can watch the hearing that we just clipped. It's literally about the weaponization of the federal government. I'll link it below as well. And also, we don't have time. I really wanted to go into the nitty-gritty and all of the interesting details and twists and turns, but we would be here all day, and this video is already running hella long. So I'm just going to keep it really concise, and I encourage everyone to research these things on your own. Below, I will provide some starter links so you can begin your research if you want to dive deeper into any of these specific cases.
The newest buzzword in our politics is lawfare, using the legal system as a political weapon against an opponent. It sits before us now as a spectacle of political gluttony. How many lawsuits, court motions, and judgments against Donald Trump can the Democratic Party chow down? Consider the groaning table. A Manhattan jury awarded author E. Jean Carroll $83.3 million in a defamation suit against Mr. Trump, who posted a bond of $91.6 million.
So picture this, Paul. Somebody comes out of the woodwork and says 30 years ago, Paul, or one of your male listeners and viewers, raped me in the changing room of a first-class department store, Bergdorf Goodman. Again, I think it was 30 years ago. I, as the alleged plaintiff, I can't quite remember even the year. I didn't go to the police. I don't have any eyewitness testimony. I don't have an eyewitness on scene, nor any surveillance tape that I can offer. It's just my general recollection that I was raped 30 years ago.
And then, because you happen to be a Republican, a conservative guy, the Democrats passed a law to revive one's ability to sue for sexual assault. No, we can't make it criminal. That's too much. But to sue for sexual assault and rape, even though the statute of limitations has long since passed. Great. Here I go. Good luck defending yourself because you don't know what the hell you were doing 30 years ago. And then you come out and you say, who's suing me? Who's saying it? I don't know this person. This is a made-up story. This is a nutcase because I don't know her. I don't remember ever meeting her, and it's a nutcase. You now get sued not just for sexual assault, but for defaming me because you called me a kook. You're not allowed. See, what the law is basically saying is you can say, I deny those claims. It did not happen. I did not rape anybody. But if you say, this person's a lunatic, she's basically making this whole story up, that's defamation that could potentially cost you almost $100 million. So that's what just happened to Donald Trump. And his alleged victim is, I've never seen somebody so happy to have allegedly been raped.
I had such great ideas for all the good I'm going to do with this money. First thing, Rachel, you and I are going to go shopping. We're going to get completely new wardrobes, new shoes, motorcycle for Crowley, new fishing rod for Robbie. Rachel, what do you want? Penthouse? It's yours, Rachel. Penthouse and France? You want France?
She is giggling on every single show about her alleged rape and how people think rape is sexy, and she didn't really think she was raped. And anyway, they came up with this really good idea to go after Donald Trump because he's a terrible man and he changed the abortion laws, and, we really have to get him. And now I have all my money and I'm going to take Rachel Maddow to France. And the woman next to her, who was her lawyer for the whole thing, she's going to help her because she's also a woman's right advocate. Unless you happen to be a Democrat complaining about former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, a Democrat, in which case you will get the boot on the forehead and that lawyer will kick you right out of the Time's Up Me Too movement because it's not okay to allege this crap against Dems, only against Trump and Republicans. Then these people are your advocates and ready to go back to helping the women. That's what just happened over here.
New York Judge Arthur Engoron has ordered Mr. Trump to pay a total of $450 million in a civil fraud trial over valuations of his net worth. The state's attorney general says if the massive bond is not posted, she'll seize Mr. Trump's New York properties.
Donald Trump may have authored the art of the deal, but he perfected the art of the steal.
New York AG Letitia James actually campaigned on the promise of getting Trump. The case she was able to muck up? Trump supposedly inflated property values in financial statements on loans that banks reviewed, approved, and that he paid back. No victims, no losses, an extremely normal practice in American life, but a judge still fined him $500 million. Meanwhile, New York let actual fraudsters off with slaps on the wrist while making an example of Trump.
Then there's the trial brought by Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg, in which Mr. Trump is accused of disguising hush money payments during the 2016 presidential campaign to porn star Stormy Daniels.
These are felony crimes in New York State, no matter who you are.
As you may have guessed, paying hush money for a marital affair is not illegal, and categorizing that payment in a false or misleading way is only considered a misdemeanor in New York. So how did Trump become branded a felon from all of this? Well, as indicated in the clip we showed before, if it's proven that the falsified records were used to cover up another crime, then boom, felony charges. The issue is that they never proved what the other crime was. So let me get this straight. Trump gets felony charges over paperwork tied to hush money to cover up a marital affair. But when the left engages in criminal activity that I don't even believe that the United States has even seen before at this level, nothing happens. How did he get 34 counts of felony charges though? I'm confused about that. I thought he just had the one Stormy situation. Instead of charging him for one act, they played legal Tetris, stacking 34 identical charges like a clown car of paperwork, all to make it appear that he was running some kind of criminal enterprise. And it worked. They got their conviction. In January 2025, Trump was sentenced to an unconditional discharge. No jail time, no fines, no probation. Just a criminal record permanently stamped onto his name like a legal scarlet letter. You know, it's almost like this was never about punishment, and it was actually just about branding him a criminal.
The argument in defense of this really quite unprecedented legal offensive boils down to one idea.
The lesson is that actually no one's above the law.
No one is above the law.
Everyone stands equal before the law.
If Democrats had limited their legal offensive to Special Counsel Jack Smith's 2 federal initiatives, one over possession of classified documents.
The next scandal we'll look at is the Mar-a-Lago classified documents case. When this case first came out, there were a lot of little details that people tried to drum up to make this seem bigger than it was. But we know that that's not genuine because all of the points that people were trying to raise were linked to the Russia hoax. Their point was that he was keeping these classified documents to sell to Russia. And we know that that's completely false at this point. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter because the DOJ dropped the case, proving that it was all for optics, all for headlines, all for continuing to drag his name.
Another for the former president's actions the day of the 2021 Capitol riot.
We already talked about January 6th, but in terms of the legal cases, there's a couple things that are worth mentioning. Trump was impeached and acquitted for incitement of an insurrection, despite never being criminally charged with it. A separate federal indictment charged him with election interference, including conspiracy to defraud the U.S. Meanwhile, multiple states tried to kick him off the ballot using the 14th Amendment, which would have been related to a charge of insurrection with no legal basis. The Supreme Court shut this down.
We begin this hour with breaking news just into CNN. The Georgia prosecutor leading the state's election interference case against President-elect Donald Trump is now disqualified.
This case is dead in the water now without Fani Willis, the person who was leading this case against Donald Trump in Fulton County. And just to keep tabs on how many cases there are against Donald Trump criminally, the other 2 in federal court, January 6th, and classified documents, those are dismissed. And then the additional case in New York City, where he was set to be sentenced, that sentencing is now not happening. So as Donald Trump enters the presidency, each of these courts that is handling a criminal case is essentially removing that issue from him to have to deal with in any period of time in the near future.
And essentially, Fani Willis, the Fulton County District Attorney who led the prosecution against Trump, effectively destroyed her own credibility with corruption, unprofessionalism, and blatant abuse of power.
You're confused. You think I'm on trial. These people are on trial for trying to steal an election in 2020. I'm not on trial, no matter how hard you try to put me on trial.
She was found to have hired her unqualified secret boyfriend, Nathan Wade, as a special prosecutor to lead the investigation against Trump. She funneled $650,000 of taxpayer money through inflated legal fees to him, then lied under oath about their romantic relationship.
That has never in the history of ever happened, ever, okay?
Recently, the Georgia Court of Appeals ruled that she and her entire office should be removed from the case. Meanwhile, Willis continues to grandstand, blaming everyone but herself, while legal experts admit this was never going to trial anyways due to presidential immunity. Even Democrats in Georgia are turning on her, admitting that she completely bungled their last best bet to get Trump.
This is the truth, Judge. And it is a lie. It is a lie.
The emergence of politicized lawfare is just one of the reasons people believe the system is somehow rigged. And who can blame them? The hyper-politicalization of the legal system is being carried out by people once known as the best and the brightest. It reflects a steady moral corruption of the system. Normal politics is being replaced by permanent payback.
Okay, so if it wasn't obvious enough, these cases weren't about legal accountability. They were election interference by way of lawfare. The goal was never conviction, just endless legal battles to financially drain and intimidate Trump and poison public perception. And as the cases collapse one by one, the real corruption is being exposed. The only question is, are you paying attention? But you know, all of this still doesn't address the fact that he's an evil, xenophobic, racist, Nazi white supremacist. Like, I still can't get over the fact that he never condemned David Duke or white supremacy.
Are you willing tonight to condemn white supremacists and militia groups?
Sure. You've got David Duke just joined, a bigot, a racist,
a problem.
I'm not looking Would you repudiate David Duke?
Sure.
David Duke and robocalls are out again, the white supremacist movement supporting you. Do you have any words for that?
Well, I disavow.
David Duke endorsed me? Okay. All right. I disavow. Okay?
When we looked at it and looked at the question, I disavowed David Duke. So I've disavowed David Duke all weekend long on Facebook, on Twitter, and obviously it's never enough.
Trump's refusal to condemn, distance himself from white supremacists.
The Anti-Defamation League is already out there asking the president to clarify why he didn't condemn white supremacists.
So are you prepared right now to make a clear and unequivocal statement renouncing the support of all white supremacists?
Of course I am. Of course I am.
When Chris joined, we had a news conference, and they asked me the exact same question. I said, I disavow. I disavowed then. I disavowed today on ABC with George Stephanopoulos. I disavowed again.
David Duke is a bad person who I disavowed on numerous occasions over the years.
I'm willing to do anything. I want to see peace.
Then do it, sir.
Say it. Do it. Say it. I totally disavow the Ku Klux Klan. I totally disavow David Duke. I've rejected the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan.
David Duke is saying to his supporters and followers, vote for Donald Trump. White supremacists are saying, vote. Do you want those votes?
No, I don't want them, and I don't want him to say it.
And you don't want the supporters?
No, I don't want anything.
What do you think of white supremacists, by the way?
I don't like any group of hate. Rebuked. Is that okay? Rebuked.
Rebuked.
Done.
Done.
Just to clear it up this morning, can you, naming it, make a declarative statement that you denounce, that the president denounces it?
Racism is evil, and those who cause violence in its name are criminals and thugs, including the KKK, neo-Nazis, white supremacists.
President Donald Trump signed a congressional joint resolution that condemns white supremacy, neo-Nazis, and other hate groups.
The President of the United States, in the year of our Lord 2020, refuses to condemn white supremacists.
He has yet once to condemn white supremacy, the neo-Nazis. He hasn't condemned a darn thing.
I wanted to write this article about how I used to kind of despise Trump and how I ended up just seeing him for who he is, being just a flawed individual. And part of that had to do with the good people on both sides lie that was perpetuated by the media. For many years, I was a Democrat. I was someone who would watch the mainstream news and felt like I was being informed. But then I became curious about Donald Trump as I was talking to more and more people about him. And that's when I came across the good people on both sides accusation as being an actual lie or misrepresentation of what he stated. And when I watched in full context where he was basically putting down the neo-Nazis and the white supremacists who showed up with tiki torches, I realized that the media purposefully misframed what he was stating. And he was actually relatively clear as far as who he was talking about was good. The people who were protesting for and against the statue being up of Robert E. Lee. And he was even more specific as far as the people who weren't violent, who were protesting on both sides of the matter. So I realized at that moment, you know, if the media can lie to me about this for years upon years, claiming that he said something that he clearly didn't say, and if you just extended that footage about 30 seconds or so, you would see it, then what else are they lying to me about? And that's what led me to become more independent-minded, eventually leaving the Democratic Party to become an independent, and just asking questions about the media that we consume, and bipartisan curiosity. Am I making determinations politically because of how I feel, or is it because of what is true? By how I feel, who is making me feel this way? Is someone propagandizing me, trying to manipulate my emotions into feeling a particular way about someone, regardless if it's someone on the left or right? I became very conscious of my emotions and very conscious of any sort of manipulation attempt to get me to sway in one direction or another for political gain. I also consider, when it comes to Donald Trump, if he is evil, then why lie about him? Because someone who is truly evil, you just tell the truth about them. The truth says everything. So is he really that evil? Is he someone that you can disagree with? I have disagreements about him. Is he someone that you have to love? You don't have to love him in order to vote for him. Is he someone that's flawed? Absolutely, he is flawed. But is he evil? Is he the next Hitler? Is he someone who's going to bring the end to democracy as we know it? That's categorically false. I see no evidence for it.
But what about his rallies? I heard they're super racist. Like Madison Square Garden, did you see they were like...
Madison Square Garden, event yesterday, and massive. People trying to get in, begging to get in, cannot get in. Record-breaking attendance, fire, all this stuff that's going on, and the way the news reports on it is wild.
But that jamboree happening right now, you see it there on your screen, in that place is particularly chilling because in 1939, more than 20,000 supporters of a different fascist leader, Adolf Hitler, packed the garden for a so-called pro-America rally. A rally where speakers voiced anti-Semitic rhetoric from a stage draped with Nazi banners. Now, against that backdrop of history, Donald Trump, the man who has threatened to use the military against opponents he calls enemies from within.
They came by the carload, making their way to Brooklyn. New York Jews, hundreds of them, rallying for the re-election of Donald Trump.
President Trump has been the biggest champion for the Jewish people in the state of Israel, and the Jewish vote in Florida, Pennsylvania, Ohio, here in New York is going to put him over the top.
Yeah, but can we still call him a fascist?
I mean, can you imagine like how to spin it? Dennis, how do you process how MSNBC, presents what happened?
Well, I'll tell you how. As I mentioned earlier, my field of study, I was one of 7 students in all of Columbia University to major in what was called communist affairs. So I know the left very, very well. The first use of this terminology was from Stalin. Stalin called Trotsky a fascist. Trotsky, with Lenin, founded the Bolshevik Party, not Stalin. Stalin was one of the early leaders, but the founders were Lenin and Trotsky. Trotsky was the head of the Red Army in the civil war that followed the Russian Revolution. You can't get more communist than Trotsky. But he became an opponent of Stalin after Lenin's death, and he fled the Soviet Union, fled to Mexico, and Stalin sent assassins to kill him with an ice pick, which was done in Mexico. He called Trotsky a fascist. So every one of your listeners needs to understand this. All leftists, not liberals, I make that distinction every time I speak. All leftists since Lenin, since Stalin, have done the exact same thing. They call their opponents fascists. There is no exception. That is what they do. They call them the worst possible names. I'll give you one other law about the left, and that is there is no example of the left being in power, whether in a country or at a university, and allowing dissent. There is no example. Truth is, what is the Soviet communist newspaper that I learned Russian to read? Pravda. Pravda means truth. Truth in the left-wing world is what they say it is. It has no objective reality. The Oregon Education Department announced the idea that math has a correct answer is white supremacy.
So number one, I recently got into a spat with someone online about Dennis Prager because this person was immediately ruling him out and ruling PragerU out. And it's very confusing to me because he's extremely educated and he has an extremely rational point of view. It doesn't mean that I agree with everything that he says. I've seen a couple of clips where I'm like, I don't jive with that. But it's a disagreement that would result in like a debate conversation if we were to ever speak. It's not something where I would completely trash him as being ignorant or not a valid source of information. I also think that the critique that PragerU is not a legitimate source of information is equally crazy to me because the main information that PragerU delivers is from experts who have written books or lead research institutions or are fellows at think tanks. I mean, like, these are legitimate people. So it just makes me question, is the only legitimate information that exists in the world from left-wing people whom you agree with? Because there's also tons of left-wing people who have opinions that then you delegitimize as well, even though they have PhDs and they've written books and they are experts in their fields. So I'm kind of confused about that. But all of that aside, I really appreciate what Dennis Prager has offered to this conversation, which is to point out that the accusation of fascism is an age-old tactic to smear and discredit leftist opponents. I think it's something that we should consider as we carelessly lob that accusation around. And just a quick question while we're on the subject of Nazis and fascism and things like that. We've established that authoritarian regimes and people like Nazis use the state and specifically police forces within the state to enact violence, some would say like legal violence, like lawfare, or some would say physical violence, against dissident voices. And I don't know, we've also checked out how the Democrat Party has been doing that with the FBI, specifically in their persecution of Donald Trump, J6 folks, Tulsi Gabbard, and pretty much all of the main characters in Trump's cabinet. So between that, the rapid anti-Semitism that you often see in leftist protests relating to Israel and the Palestine conflict.
It's open season on Jews on our campus.
A congressional committee yesterday hosted students from 9 schools, including Harvard, MIT, Columbia, and Stanford, who implored lawmakers to hold their universities accountable. The students shared stories of harassment and assault on campus, claiming their complaints often go ignored.
We have been attacked with sticks outside of our library. We have been surrounded by angry mobs, and we have been threatened to, quote, keep running.
This past Monday at UC Berkeley, protesters shattered glass doors at an auditorium where a former member of the Israeli Defense Force was scheduled to speak.
Combined with the legal discrimination that was enabled under DEI.
DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. That sounds nice and responsible. No wonder all big companies now require employees to get training in it.
All white people are racist.
Some trainings are just divisive and dumb.
I believe that white people are born into not being human.
This is extreme, I take it.
It is extreme, but it's becoming more of the norm.
These slides were shown at a Coca-Cola diversity training.
The thesis of this training was try to be less white. They're talking about arrogance and things like that. That is by no means a white thing. The point is to demonize the other side as much as possible.
I don't know, man. It's sort of seeming like we might want to do some self-reflection, some self-interrogation to figure out what the hell we're doing here on the left, because we're not looking good.
I've said it for years now. He's cogent. But I undersold him when I said he was cogent. He's far beyond cogent. In fact, I think he's better than he's ever been. Start your tape right now, because I'm about to tell you the truth. And F you if you can't handle the truth. This version of Biden, intellectually, analytically, is the best Biden ever.
Watch me. I mean, honest to God, that's all I think. Watch me. So the best way to get something done, if it holds near and dear to you that you like to be able to. Anyway, let me start off with 2 words: made in America. Made in America. And that's not hyperbole. I'm not joking about that, as you know.
You are the oldest president ever.
Pretty good shape, huh?
Some people ask whether you are fit for the job. And when you hear that, I wonder what you think.
Last night I was on the television. I was on the telephone. When I raised that before, some of you looked at me like, where have you been, Biden? You've been spending too much in China or something. I haven't been to China.
How would you say your mental focus is?
Oh, it's focused. I haven't. Look, America is a nation that can be defined in a single word. I was in the foothills of the Himalayas with Xi Jinping. Watch me. If you're wondering where to go, again, visit vaccines.com. Visit vaccines.gov, vaccines.com, or text your zip code to 438829.
Or 30330, whatever.
If you get any questionable calls, please tell us by going to report fraud, DOTFTC.gov. But look, let me ask a rhetorical question. No, I won't. Anyway.
Let's talk about the biggest, most absurd gaslighting campaign in modern history. The Democrat Party and mainstream media's desperate attempt to convince us that Joe Biden was a sharp, fully functioning world leader, even as he was falling off of bikes, freezing mid-sentence, literally needing to be guided off stage like a lost grandpa at Costco. I mean, this wasn't just a little spin. This was full-blown industrial-strength psychological manipulation. Biden was out here reading teleprompter instructions out loud, and we were supposed to pretend this was normal. Every time Biden slurred his words, every time he forgot where he was, every time he randomly started shaking hands with invisible people, the media was right there, assuring us that we were imagining things. It's just a stutter, they said. Trump is the real danger, they yelled. This wasn't just optics. This man had access to nuclear codes while struggling to remember his defense secretary's name, which happened several times, by the way. I mean, people are having a really hard time with Elon Musk right now, being an unelected person involved in government dealings, but his advisors, whom none of y'all know, were actually running the country. And now you have a problem with Elon Musk? Come on. Come on. But you know, the real issue is that even if you just mention Biden's mental decline, you are labeled a MAGA cultist spreading dangerous disinformation. But then, like magic, the second it became politically inconvenient to pretend otherwise, the entire establishment had a sudden epiphany. Like clockwork, the media, the Democrat elites, the same people who swore up and down Biden was sharp as a tack, suddenly started openly discussing his cognitive issues. Hillary Clinton came out and gently suggested that Biden might be slipping. CNN suddenly noticed his verbal stumbles. The same journalists who mocked Republicans for questioning Biden's mental fitness were suddenly having serious discussions about his challenges. Why? Because they realized they had to go with Kamala. And poof, Biden was officially toast. And let's be honest, if Biden had been polling better, they would have pumped him full of whatever magic juice keeps him semi-functional and wheeled his ass right back into the White House. And they'd still be calling all of us conspiracy theorists if we noticed. After watching this absolute train wreck for 4 years, can we finally admit that the Democrats don't care about truth, integrity, or the welfare of a country? They care about power. That's it. Whatever keeps them in control, they'll do, no matter the cost. And that's not to say that others have a pass, but we have to stop believing they are an exception or the lesser of two evils. They aren't. They are leading the pack of Washington wolves. The bottom line, they lied. For years, they gaslit us, mocked us, and covered up what we could see with our own eyes. But the second Biden became a liability, they tossed him under the bus faster than he could say.
End of quote. Repeat the line.
That's applicable to today's angry, almost addicted left. If you think about it, we have suffered now from almost a decade of Russian collusion, laptop disinformation, 5 criminal and civil suits, 91 indictments, efforts to get him off the ballot. I could go on in nauseating fashion. But they all have had 2 results. One, the people are now bored and weary with all of these psychodramas and melodramas. And 2, they're starting to see them as substitutes for substantive criticism or substantive discussion. In other words, when you have nothing to say about the border policy of Donald Trump or nothing to say about his new Jacksonian foreign policy, you revert back to form. And that's what we're seeing right now. You would think in this first 100 days of Donald Trump, there would be robust debate about economic policies, border policy. There is not. Now we're talking about Elon Musk went like this, and he went like this to the crowd, this, and they said he was a Nazi. And then, of course, the internet almost immediately was awash in imagery of Elizabeth Warren, Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama. That swept over the entire world almost that Elon Musk was giving a Nazi salute. There was no evidence he did not, and that ate up a 24-hour cycle. Then we had General Milley came out of the woodwork, and now they're releasing interviews that he thinks Donald Trump is a fascist and is the greatest threat in history to the United States. Are we having any discussion with General Milley about the chain of command? Should we look at the Joint Chiefs, the structure to make sure that no one in this advisory capacity tries to interrupt the chain of command, as did General Milley. No, we're just heard fascist, 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 and then that disagreed. And of course, we had Bishop booed. She was going to give this national prayer sermon. She gave it, and then she hijacked her own sermon and started haranguing Donald Trump about being too harsh, and he has to be merciful if he in the treatment of transgendered and illegal aliens. Nothing about an open border where 80 to 100,000 people are killed through imported fentanyl. Nothing about criminal aliens that hurt and maim and kill Americans. Nothing about cutting in front of the line and hurt legal applicants. Nothing about overwhelming social services so that our poor don't have the access that they previously had. No, it's just a performance art, virtue signaling way of getting attention. And indeed, the bishop went through all of the talk shows, The View, to highlight her confrontation with Donald Trump. What am I getting at here in conclusion? The left is out of ideas. They're like an addict that is addicted and fixed on their next, melodrama. And they know that that is destroying them. They know that people want substantive debate. They know they can't do that because they're on the losing end of that argument. They know they should not continue with these psychodramas, the strident invective, and they can't stop. Like a zombie addict, they can't stop.
Are you or your loved ones suffering from illnesses such as TDS, also known as Trump derangement syndrome? Do you dismiss or deny the current issues facing our country, such as historic inflation, illegal immigration, corporate corruption, World War III escalations, and the chronic disease epidemic? Are you willing to elect someone who was the least popular vice president in modern history, and who offers no policy or vision for America, simply because your brain keeps telling you anyone but Trump? If so, you might be struggling from TDS. Introducing independence. Independence allows you the freedom to finally think independently once again. Instead of believing everything you hear from the mainstream media, independence allows for constructive critical thinking.
I used to hear people on the news say things like,
Donald Trump and the movement he has encouraged are a threat to democracy.
And I instantly believed it. With independence, I now realize the media is run by the Democrat elite, who are a corrupt oligarchy that censors free speech, silences political opponents, supports forever wars, and abandons democracy by anointing its candidates.
Independence may not be for everyone. If you enjoy being lied to about your president's cognitive abilities, support Orwellian totalitarianism, or are excited about communist fiscal policy, independence may not be right for you. Common side effects of independence may include an awakening of rational thought, successfully identifying propaganda, freedom of choice, loss of hatred, anti-narcissistic behavior, and love of democracy.
I used to blindly hate whoever my party was running against. I didn't care about facts or policy because I was hopelessly indoctrinated. With independence, I'm much more interested in policies that uphold democracy, and I truly care about the health of our country and its citizens.
Ask your doctor if independence is right for you, and enjoy your freedoms once again.
Because all of these actions only show us that you don't care about this country, you don't care about the American people, you don't care about mothers and their children. You don't care about this country, and that is unacceptable if you claim to be the President of the United States. So we are here. We are not going anywhere. We are going to continue to fight back, and we are going to continue to speak lies to his truth. Thank you.
Alrighty then.
And we are going to continue to speak lies to his truth.
Alrighty then.
And we are going to continue to speak lies to his truth.
Alrighty then.
It's human to tell white lies, smooth over details, and leave out inconvenient truths to stretch the truth a little bit and make our cases stronger. And it's easy to justify it. We tell ourselves we're correcting for a greater injustice, that we have to fight fire with fire. And in this case, we've convinced ourselves that Trump and Elon are existential threats and that Any tactic that we can use against them is fair game, because we believed we were preventing something worse. But here's the thing about lying and accepting lies. It distorts reality. The more we do it, the harder it becomes to tell truth from fiction. It's like being trapped in a hall of mirrors. At first you know what's real and what's just a reflection, but the deeper you go, the more warped the images become. Eventually, you lose all sense of direction and reality itself starts to blur. But the worst part is we've gotten invested in the illusion. At this point, it's no longer about truth, it's about identity, reputation, moral superiority. Because if we admit the truth, if we acknowledge that the media and politicians lied on this level, then what does that say about us? What does it say about the arguments we made? The friendships we destroyed, the years spent believing something that wasn't true.
Even I sometimes think, their lies and propaganda can't be that deliberate, can't be that systematic. Just look at how often they lie, how continuously and relentlessly they push false narratives that are only about their politicized agenda. And every time it gets exposed, every time it gets revealed, they continue to insist that they either got it right or they just move on as nothing happened. The same thing was true with claiming that anybody concerned about Joe Biden's cognitive decline was engaged in right-wing disinformation, only for that obviously to have been fully vindicated in every way. And yet over and over they were insisting angrily that anyone questioning Joe Biden's cognitive abilities was engaged in some sort of twisted propaganda. This is why faith and trust in the media has completely collapsed. You can just almost every night give a different example. But to try and equate January 6th as a coup and insurrection on par with 9/11 and Pearl Harbor or the Holocaust and slavery, to depict Donald Trump as a Nazi-like figure, only to then completely abandon it and not follow through on any of the steps you would absolutely embrace if you truly had that authentic conviction that that was true, is just going to erode all of this even further. None of their actions are commensurate with their stated beliefs, and that basically is another way of saying not just that somebody lied, but that they are very well aware that what they said was a lie.
This is where the banality of evil shows itself. Evil doesn't always arrive with a dictator's boot or a villain's twirling mustache. It thrives in the mundane. It looks like bureaucrats just doing their jobs, journalists reporting for the clickbait, activists fighting for justice. It's ordinary people making small, rationalized compromises all in the name of the greater good. And so we kept compromising truth. We called Trump Hitler even though he never killed anyone, never censored the press, and has done more to break up media monopolies than any president before him. We branded him a racist, a rapist, a criminal, even as the evidence against him collapsed under scrutiny. We refused to admit his proven innocence or acknowledge our role in spreading misinformation. But hey, it was all for the greater good, right? So we kept justifying denying reality. When our lies were exposed, we doubled down instead of admitting the truth. When he was vindicated, we moved the goalposts instead of acknowledging our mistakes. When the media and political establishment were caught orchestrating a 10-year-long smear campaign, we turned the volume up because admitting the lie would mean confronting our own complicity. But here's the crux of the issue for me. By justifying corruption in the name of the greater good, we didn't just tolerate it. We became a part of it. We weren't just passive bystanders. We fed the machine and perpetuated its destruction. And once we justified it long enough, something even more dangerous happened. We didn't just allow evil. We redefined it. What was once condemned became noble. What was once unthinkable became righteous. And that is how we can do evil and call it good.
I've been trying to educate people about the horrors of the Nazi regime and the Soviet regime in particular. I've concentrated mostly on those two because that's good enough. And trying to let people know that it was through the fault of people much like them that those systems arose, and that there are steps you can take to limit the probability that you would participate in such a thing, and that those steps are associated with trying to be truthful in your speech and actions, because the stability of those systems depends on the willingness of individuals to lie. And also on your willingness to take responsibility for the malevolence in your own heart that manifests itself in those social movements. No one is so habituated to suffering that they can read the Gulag Archipelago, which is actually quite hard to read, without having it affect them. Like, you're psychopathic if that book doesn't affect you, you know. It should, if you read it properly, it affects you deeply. And it's not the only example of that kind of literature. So the people who are habituated aren't. They've just been shown low-resolution representations of things they don't understand that look vaguely bad. They don't know a damn thing about them. And our education system has done a tremendously appalling job of educating young people about the absolute catastrophe of radical leftism. Now, it's not much better with regards to, say, the actions of the Nazis, although I would say on average people are more aware of that. But they don't, but it's shallow knowledge. So you make the knowledge deep, and deep knowledge changes people and wakes them up. You know, I mean, the only reason that I ever got convinced that good and evil were real, more real than anything else, wasn't because I learned that good was real. That's hard. That's hard. It's hard to learn that. You have to find examples of transcendent good, you know. They're rare. Evil, all you have to do is look. You read history a bit. And read it like it's about you. And there's no way that you can do that without a transformation. But people won't do it. It's like, you want to imagine yourself as an Auschwitz guard? That's a rough thing, you see, because you have to figure out. See, Jung said if you confronted the shadow, which is the dark side of people, the aggressive side, the malevolent side, that it really reaches all the way down to hell. And Dante sort of was trying to put forward the same thing when he wrote the Inferno, right, with the levels of evil, right, because it was a voyage through the levels of evil right to the bottom. He thought the bottom was betrayal. It's pretty good. The center of malevolence is betrayal. I like that because to betray someone, you have to get them to trust you, and trust is a moral virtue, right, especially if it's courageous trust, because it puts you in alignment with other people and allows you to move forward into life. And if you betray that, it's like a knife in the heart through the back, especially if it's someone who loves you, betrays you. And especially if they betray you for your virtues. That's a really nice twist. So, I believe, because I think that people are capable of good, that if they know enough about evil, that will straighten them out. So, but who wants that? You know, this is one of the things I really like about Jung. He knew that the pathway to enlightenment was barred by the necessity of a passage through hell. And that no one was going to do that. That's why there isn't a world full of enlightened people, you might say. Like, if it was just a matter of doing nice things, following your bliss, let's say, however you might put it, then why wouldn't everyone walk up the stairway to heaven? That isn't how it works. That's not how it works at all. I don't think you can be convinced of the necessity for moral action until you understand exactly how dark and terrible things can get, and that it's your fault that they're getting that way. Who wants to think that? So, you can think it though, but not without it burning you.
So we convinced ourselves that we were good guys, that we were fighting for justice. But what happens when justice itself is corrupted? Well, to start, we don't condemn murder, we justify it. If it serves our agenda, we call it justice instead of cowardice. Instead of doing the harder work of addressing our own corruption and organizing a stronger party to get votes, we openly call for the deaths of our opponents, celebrate when they're killed, and react with disappointment when the assassination attempts fail. We have become bipolar in our thinking. We romanticize traditional communities while simultaneously forcing our ideologies onto faiths and cultures that do not want them. We shame the rich and powerful among us, but manipulate foreign governments through the promise of food and essential services. We scream about corruption on the right that goes unproven, yet when faced with the receipts of our own crimes, we cover it up. But this is how evil works, isn't it? It doesn't arrive as a monstrous force, it masquerades as righteousness. It twists morality, corrupts justice, and rebrands evil acts as virtue. And this is the final stage of moral decay. Tolerating evil is the first failure, but celebrating it as good, that is when we slide into tyranny.
Mr. Schellenberger, Can you explain how you traced USAID funding that served as the basis for whistleblower report in 2019, which led to the impeachment of President Trump?
Sure. Well, you may remember that the so-called whistleblower was in the White House was actually a CIA analyst, and in that whistleblower's complaint, which led to the impeachment, one of the central pieces of evidence was created by a USAID funded and controlled organization called the OCCRP. And we have another piece out today about how it participated in the Russiagate hoax as well, creating essentially very important information leading to that. So, I mean, you have in USAID a much larger fund of money and a much broader strategy for information control that included censorship, but also, as I mentioned, taking control of investigative journalism really worldwide. I mean, its ambitions were, amazing. So yeah, I mean, that's an agency. When we saw that get shut down by DOGE, I thought that was completely appropriate. If there's something in there that it was doing that's valuable, then you could refund it later.
Well, I think it's always been known that our government has funded the change in administrations, if we can say it politely, of other governments. But isn't it borderline treason when the taxpayer when organizations entrusted with protecting our country are now undermining our own government?
Absolutely. I mean, if you're trying to do regime change, illegal, if you're weaponizing DHS, FBI, CISA, that's treasonous regime change activities redirected, that you developed abroad, that we developed abroad for regime change, directed against the American people and our representatives. I mean, it's shocking, and we still haven't dealt with it as a country.
Today, we are going to dive into reckless and wasteful spending of our federal government, particularly when it comes to foreign aid. The United States should not be the sugar daddy for the entire world, especially not for countries and organizations who act contrary to our nation's beliefs. Our country is $36 trillion in debt, yet we continue to send billions of dollars overseas, often funding projects that are not just useless, but in many cases actively harmful. Taking the path to fiscal responsibility is often a lonely journey, but thanks to Elon Musk and DOGE, they brought to light the waste that I've been highlighting for over the last decade. I uncovered over $1 trillion in government waste, with the State Department and USAID being some of the worst offenders. Let me give you just a few examples of what these unelected bureaucrats are spending your hard-earned money on. $4.8 million went to Ukraine's public affairs office in Kiev to fund social media influencers. USAID also funded a group of Ukrainian women-led designers to travel to the Paris fashion show. I don't know about you, but I'd imagine Ukrainian women have more important things to worry about than appearing in the Paris fashion show. USAID spent $2 million on transgender surgeries, hormone therapy, and gender-affirming care in Guatemala. $3 million was spent to promote girl-centric climate action in Brazil. $25,000 to fund a transgender opera in Colombia. Was nobody in Colombia willing to buy a ticket? USAID spent $32,000 in Peru to create a comic featuring a trans hero to address social and mental health issues. What does that have to do with diplomacy? USAID gave $87.9 million to help Afghans farm, and incidentally, farm poppy, the plant from which opium is extracted. As of 2021, Afghanistan supplied 90% of the world's heroin. I thought the saying in the U.S. was just say no to drugs. How about we just say no to wasteful foreign aid? State Department paid $330,000 to compile a disinformation index to blacklist conservative media outlets. USAID funneled over $54 million to EcoHealth Alliance, funding the very organization linked to the Wuhan Institute of Virology, the likely origin of the COVID-19 pandemic. Disgraceful. $15 million was awarded to Taliban-controlled Afghanistan to distribute oral contraceptives and condoms. Why are we borrowing money to send money overseas?
In just 1 month, Trump's administration and the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, have dropped bombshell after bombshell exposing the corruption, fraud, and abuse we worked so hard to ignore. The left was so convinced that Trump was the villain and MAGA was evil that we failed to see that we had become exactly what we claimed to hate. Here's the cold hard truth about what they found. We are the corrupt. DOGE's audits have already uncovered $100 billion a year of federal fraud, mismanagement, and waste. And they're just getting started. Tax dollars meant to help people were funneled into bloated contracts, wasteful incentives, and backroom deals, while the institutions we trusted used the most vulnerable as human shields to enrich themselves. We are the oppressors. USAID wasn't just providing aid, it was toppling governments, meddling in elections, and overthrowing democratically elected leaders worldwide using our tax dollars. We silenced dissent. U.S. taxpayer money funded and controlled media across the globe, shaping narratives and crushing the integrity of independent journalism. We raged about state-controlled media in Russia and China while doing the exact same thing. We justify political violence. USAID-backed groups fueled violent uprisings abroad and bankrolled domestic chaos. From billions in damages during BLM riots to color revolutions overseas, taxpayer money was directly linked to politically motivated destruction. We persecuted the opposition. DOGE uncovered proof that USAID funded media outlets to spread misinformation about Trump, manipulating public perception across 3 election cycles in order to control the narrative and sway votes. And while these revelations are still breaking, one thing is clear. The people behind it were high-ranking Democrats, leftist-run institutions, and the same media and government cronies who told us we were on the right side of history. Now, of course, there are corrupt Republicans too. But Trump, Elon Musk, and Trump's cabinet, many of these people had their lives destroyed trying to blow the whistle on these things. And now we are watching in real time as they are trying to blow the whole lid off. And instead of adjusting to this new information, all I see is the left slipping deeper into denial. I mean, we are straight up walking down the street like... We spent years screaming about fighting against fascism, fighting to stop oppression, standing for truth. But we weren't the heroes. We were the villains. And the worst part, we cannot see it still to this day. We are so deep in that hall of mirrors that we can't even recognize our own reflection anymore. All right, look. So I never wanted to make a video where it sounds like I'm defending Trump or Elon Musk. There's literally nothing in my personality or my history or my values that would make me cape for billionaires. I do not see them as helpless victims, and I definitely don't think they need me rushing to their defense. But here's what does need defending. The truth. We are living in unprecedented times. We are staring down some extremely serious and frankly terrifying circumstances in this country and across the world. And if we allow ourselves to be misdirected, lied to, and even worse, if we participate in those lies, we will pay the price. Not someday, not hypothetically, but directly. And soon. And I personally refuse to be part of that anymore. At this point, it's not even a question. The media, the Democrat Party, and plenty of Republicans too, have engaged in what can only be described as an orchestrated campaign of disinformation. Yes, the exact same thing they were warning us to look out against, that's what they did. And there's no other way to describe this. And let's be clear, this was not incompetence. This was not an accident. You don't get this level of coordinated lying, this level of cover-up, this level of outright fraud without intent. We were intentionally misled. Now, let me be crystal clear. This does not mean Trump is perfect. It does not mean Elon Musk is perfect. They are flawed human beings, just like the rest of us. Except they are extremely rich and powerful, so their flaws have a much greater impact. And perhaps because of that, what I am saying is we need vigilance. We need to be able to step back and objectively assess what is happening right in front of us, without letting emotional narratives or partisan loyalties cloud our judgment. If the same media apparatus that has repeatedly lied and manipulated the American public is pushing a certain narrative, we should not be swallowing it whole. We should be questioning it, researching it, fact-checking it. Not by regurgitating whatever fact-checking website is funded by the same media conglomerates, but by seeking out opposing sources, cross-referencing, and thinking critically about what we're reading. And you know what? The truth is probably not sitting neatly in the middle. Sometimes it's not even going to be on the page. But it's the very least that we can do. And I don't see anyone I know doing that right now, and it's creating a very scary distortion of reality. Now, I fully expect that those who have been in my circle or who share my worldview may respond to this with hostility. At best, they'll write me off and ignore me. It's highly likely there'll be a smear campaign and a lot of burnt bridges. And yeah, it's insane that I have to say that, but we all know I do, because that's exactly how intolerant and destructive the left has become. And just to clarify, because I know someone's going to comment on it, I do still identify as someone on the left because that's my location. In my 20s, before I knew any better, that's where I planted myself. My career, my social world, my identity. That is the life I built for myself, and that's my worldview. But now that I'm a grown-ass woman and have watched how foolish it is to believe that I was on some perpetually good side, and how naive it was to think that I could just rest in that without question, I've come to realize that we cannot afford to lock ourselves into rigid ideological camps anymore. It's more important than ever to claim our independence, to make it clear that no one owns our mind, our voices, or our allegiance. People, ideas, and movements should have to earn our support at every turn. But that's me stepping off the soapbox. So what do you think? Is Trump really so bad that we shouldn't question the left's history or our own belief systems? Or should we be even more vigilant, knowing how many lies have warped our understanding of reality? And now that Trump has surrounded himself with people determined to expose even greater truths on a grander scale, will we have the courage to listen?